Ernesto Alvarez's life could be told through the grain lines of wood. Every morning before the sun had the courage to rise, he stepped into his workshop, a converted old shed behind his small adobe home in Espanola, New Mexico. The wooden floor creaked under his boots as if greeting him, and the familiar scent of pine shavings wrapped around him like a warm blanket. For most people, wood was material. For Ernesto, it was memory and purpose. He was a carpenter by trade, but in truth he was something gentler, an artist who shaped kindness with his bare hands. In the corner of the workshop stood a row of gifts he had built over the years, a cradle for a young mother abandoned by her boy, and a dining table for a family who had lost everything in a kitchen fire, a collection of wooden toys crafted for kids whose Christmas lists were longer than their parents' paychecks. He never sold these pieces. He gave them away quietly, often leaving them on porches with a handwritten note, "For your family, from someone who believes in you." The town knew it was him, of course. Everyone knew, but Ernesto never admitted it. Some acts of kindness, he believed, should stay between the giver and the universe. He lifted a plank of cedar now, running his thumb along its edge. The wood was smooth. But his thumb wasn't steady. He had to blink, harder than usual, because the edges of the plank looked fuzzy, too fuzzy. It had begun years earlier, night blindness, trouble seeing in dim light, occasional flashes of nothingness. He ignored it, chalking it up to age or fatigue, until one day he misjudged the angle of a saw, and barely missed cutting his own hand. That was the day the doctor told him the words that echoed in his mind every night since: retinitis pigmentosa, a degenerative eye condition. "I'm sorry, Ernesto, your vision will continue to fade." At first, he told no one. Not even his younger sister, who called every Sunday to check on him. He didn't want worry, he didn't want pity, and above all, he didn't want to be treated differently. Not by his town, not by the families he helped, not by the children who ran up to him shouting, "Mr. Ernesto, can you fix my toy?" So he kept building, kept sanding, kept giving, but every week the world grew dimmer. Lights blurred into halos, faces became silhouettes, and still he worked, because kindness didn't need perfect vision. One chilly morning, with frost hugging the edges of the workshop windows, Ernesto found something unusual. While searching through a donated pile of materials left by a local hardware store, he uncovered an old wooden guitar, cracked along the side, strings rusted, a faded sticker of a desert sunset peeling off the body. He lifted it gently. "Who left you here, huh?" he whispered, as if the guitar could answer. His hands knew instruments. When he wasn't building, he loved playing. Little tunes on his porch during summer nights, melodies he never played for an audience. Music felt like carving sound into emotion, and he treated it with the same tenderness as his woodwork. He ran his fingers down the guitar's neck. It was worn like him, tired like him, but still sturdy, still able to make something beautiful, if someone cared enough to try. Maybe that was why it hit him so deeply. Maybe that was why he sat down on the workshop stool, held the guitar in his lap, and breathed in the dusty scent of wood and memory. He strummed one string. It was off-key, but the vibration hummed through him. He strummed again and again. Then he whispered the thought that had been trapped inside him for months, but had never dared escape. "If I can't keep building with my hands, maybe I can still build something with my voice." It was a terrifying thought. He had never performed for anyone beyond his own porch, and stepping into a world where people watched, where people judged, felt impossible for a quiet man who lived in the shadows of kindness, but the shadows were closing in. His vision was slipping away faster than he admitted. Every week, the workshop felt dimmer, not because of the lights, but because of his eyes. Suddenly, he faced the truth. There would come a day soon, when he would no longer see the wood he loved, no longer see the smiles he created, no longer see the world he devoted his life to helping. And if he wanted to do something bold, something just for himself, the time was running out. He looked down at the guitar cradled in his hands. Its cracked body reminded him of his own breaking heart. Its worn fretboard reminded him of the paths he had walked. Its quiet presence reminded him that sometimes the most beautiful things were the ones the world overlooked. He stood slowly, knees cracking, and placed the guitar on his workbench. Next to it, under a pile of old sandpaper, was something he hadn't touched in years, a dusty flyer from America's Got Talent, given to him by a friend who once insisted he audition. Back then, he had laughed, "Nah, I build chairs, not dreams on TV." But now the idea didn't feel ridiculous. It felt necessary. Maybe, just maybe, before the lights of his world went out completely, he could step into the brightest lights of all. Not to be famous, not to be applauded, but to say something to the universe. I was here, I created something, I mattered. He picked up the flyer with trembling fingers. For once in his life, Ernesto Alvarez, quiet carpenter, town angel, giver of kindness, filled out an application not for work, not for someone else's happiness, but for a chance of his own. The chance to sing before darkness took the rest of his sight. He sealed the envelope, placed it on his kitchen table, and sat back with a long, shaky breath. Outside, the sun was rising. He couldn't see its colors clearly anymore, but he felt its warmth. And in that warmth, Ernesto whispered a promise to himself. Before my lights fade, I'll step into theirs. The air inside the America's Got Talent backstage area carried a nervous electricity, like the moment before a storm cracks the sky open. Performers paced in tight circles, costume sequins glinting under fluorescent lights. Singers hummed scales, dancers stretched, magicians practiced card flips with trembling hands. And in the middle of all this noise, all this color, stood Ernesto Alvarez. Holding his guitar like a lifeline, he had arrived in Los Angeles the day before, guided mostly by the kindness of strangers and the blurry shapes of street signs. The city was a chaotic watercolor to him, nothing clear, nothing defined, just smudges of movement and light. He had to rely on something deeper than sight now, trust. Now he waited backstage in a simple flannel shirt and faded jeans, looking like he had wandered off a ranch instead of walking into one of the biggest stages in the world. People passed him, performers, staff, security, but their features blended together. Everyone was a silhouette, a moving cloud, a voice without a face. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of his guitar. Up, down, the familiar texture grounded him. A young stagehand with a bright, lilting voice approached. "Mr. Alvarez, are you ready? You're up next." Ernesto blinked, squinting at the blurry shape in front of him. He could tell by the shorter height and energy that she was young, but her face was already lost to him. "As ready as I can be," he said with a soft chuckle. She hesitated before speaking again, like she had noticed something about him. First time performing, Ernesto swallowed, thinking of all the nights on his porch, strumming to nobody but the desert wind and the quiet stars. He nodded. First time performing, where the world can actually see me. She smiled. He could hear it more than he could see it. "Well, from what I heard while you were warming up, they're gonna be glad they saw you." He exhaled slowly. Her kindness steadied him far more than she realized. Then, through the heavy curtains ahead, he heard the muffled roar of thousands of people applauding the act before him. A booming voice, Starry Cruz, announced the ending of one performance and the beginning of the next. The stagehand squeezed his arm. "Okay, Ernesto, when they call your name, just walk straight toward the big white X on the floor. The lights will be bright, but don't let them scare you." He nearly laughed, too late for that. Then, suddenly next up, Ernesto Alvarez. The name echoed across the massive room. A hollow silence filled his chest. His pulse thudded in his ears. This was it. He took a deep breath, adjusted the strap of his guitar, and stepped forward. The curtains parted, and his world exploded. Light, so many lights, flooded his vision in a blinding wash of white and gold. He blinked rapidly, but nothing sharpened. Everything looked like the sun reflecting on water, beautiful, but impossible to look at. He walked carefully, counting each step like a prayer. 1, 2, 3. He could hear the audience, a sea of whispers and curiosity. They faded in and out like distant waves. Somewhere ahead were the 4 judges, but to him, they were only glowing outlines sitting behind a table. He raised his chin slightly, hoping he was facing the right direction. A familiar British voice came through the haze. "Hello there," Simon Cowell said. "Welcome. What's your name?" Ernesto tightened his grip on the guitar. "My name is Ernesto Alvarez," he answered, his voice steadier than he felt. "And what will you be doing for us today?" Simon asked, the question every contestant had to answer. He breathed in and out. "I'll be singing," Ernesto said, "and playing my guitar." Sofia Vergara leaned forward. "You seem a little nervous. Is this your first time performing on a stage this big?" Ernesto nodded softly. "Probably the biggest stage I will ever stand on." There was something in his tone, something fragile, that caught the judge's attention. Heidi tilted her head. "What made you decide to audition?" she asked gently. Ernesto hesitated. He wasn't a man who liked sharing personal things. His life was built around helping others quietly, without expecting anything. But the truth pressed against his chest. He didn't want pity, but he also didn't want to hide from the moment. Finally, he said, "I've been a carpenter my whole life. I build things for families in my community, but my eyes." He paused, swallowing hard. "They're not what they used to be, and before the lights fade completely. I wanted to try something I've never had the courage to do." A stillness swept the massive theater. No cough, no whisper, nothing, just silence. A silence heavy enough to make Ernesto's breath tremble. Simon's voice softened. "Something rare for him. Thank you for sharing that with us." Ernesto gave a small nod of gratitude he hoped was facing the right direction. The floor beneath him vibrated faintly with energy. His feet felt rooted, but his heart felt like it was floating. Every fear, every doubt, every memory of the workshop and the discarded guitar brought him to this single instant. Then Simon said the words that made the entire world hold its breath. "Ernesto, whenever you're ready." He adjusted the guitar against his chest, ran his fingers across the strings to feel their spacing, closed his eyes, not because he wanted to, but because it didn't make much difference anymore. From the outside, it looked like a man calming his nerves. But from the inside, it was a man saying goodbye to one world and stepping into another. He inhaled, feeling the warm glow of the stage lights on his face, lights he could barely see, but could feel like a rising sun. Then he whispered to himself, "Let's do this, before the lights fade." He placed his fingers on the frets. The audience leaned forward. The judges held their breath. The air thickened with anticipation. His first chord rang out, and the story of a quiet carpenter began unfolding in front of millions. The first note escaped Ernesto's guitar like a fragile bird taking flight, unsteady for a split second, then soaring with unexpected grace. It wasn't a dramatic explosion of sound. It wasn't polished or perfect. It was real, textured by the same roughness that lived in his calloused hands and weathered heart. His fingers trembled at first, but the strings seemed to remember the music even when his eyes couldn't remember the light. The melody drifted into the vast theater, delicate yet powerful, like a whisper that somehow carried across a canyon. The audience, thousands strong, leaned forward unconsciously. Then Ernesto began to sing. His voice was a mixture of sand and sunlight, rugged, warm, full of cracks that made it human and honest. It wasn't the voice of a trained singer. It was the voice of a man who had lived, lost, loved, and kept going anyway. The lyrics were his own, a lullaby he had written in the quiet corners of his life, a song he'd once hummed while building a wooden cradle for a young mother struggling to raise her newborn, a tune he played on lonely evenings when the world felt too big and he felt too small. But today, the song took on a new meaning. Asterisk, asterisk, when the night grows cold and the shadows climb, I'll hold the lines of your fading sky, and even when my eyes forget the dawn, my love will guide the world you're on. Asterisk, asterisk, his voice softened on the last word, cracking slightly, not from strain, but from emotion so deep it shook through him like an old foundation tested by time. The judges felt it instantly. Sofia blinked rapidly, her bright expression melting into something tender. Heidi pressed a hand to her chest. Howie sat back in his chair, unable to tear his gaze away. Simon, usually the hardest to read, stilled completely, not tapping his pen, not adjusting his papers, not shifting in his seat, just listening, because the song wasn't just pretty, it was true. Ernesto's world, however, was shifting. Halfway through the performance, he noticed something frightening. The bright wash of lights that had blinded him moments earlier was dimming, not literally, his own vision. The blurriness intensified. Shadows bled together, shapes dissolved. He blinked once, twice, 3 times, nothing sharpened. The stage, the audience, the judges. They faded into a cloud of white mist, like someone had breathed across a window pane inside his eyes. His fingers momentarily faltered. Fear surged into his throat, heavy and suffocating. Not now, please, not now, this moment. This one shot at something meaningful before darkness claimed everything, couldn't fall apart. Not here, not like this. A murmur moved through the audience as they sensed a shift in him. Ernesto closed his eyes, this time on purpose. He couldn't see anyway, and in the darkness behind his eyelids, he pictured his workshop. The cedar planks drying against the wall, the toy truck he carved for little Mateo, who ran up to him every Sunday after church, the old guitar he repaired with care, the same one he held now. He pictured every smile he'd helped build, every quiet act of kindness, every moment that proved he didn't need perfect sight to create something good. His breathing steadied, and he kept singing. Asterisk, asterisk, and if the light should fade for me, don't cry, my dear. Just let it be, for even when the dark surrounds, my heart will play what can't be found. Asterisk, asterisk, the note hung in the air like a final brushstroke on a masterpiece. A woman in the 5th row covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. A father holding his little daughter squeezed her hand. A teenager who came just to see acrobats wiped his eyes, embarrassed but overwhelmed. This wasn't a performance anymore, it was a confession, a man revealing his deepest fear, not with words of sorrow but with a melody strong enough to pierce through thousands of strangers' hearts. People didn't just hear the song, they felt it, because everyone in that room, at some point in their life, had watched something precious fade. Dreams, health, love, time. Ernesto's voice wrapped all those universal heartbreaks into something strangely comforting. His guitar softened into a gentle picking pattern, each note falling like a drop of rain on still water. Then the melody swelled, rising with the kind of courage only a man facing the inevitable could summon. He lifted his head slightly toward the glowing blur he hoped was the audience. His voice deepened, cracked, then rebuilt itself. Asterisk, asterisk. So let me give the world my song before the night pulls me along. Let me shine, though dim the light, let me love you, while I still have sight. Asterisk, asterisk, as he strummed the final chord, his fingers trembled violently. He felt the vibration through the guitar's body, through his arms, through his entire being. It was over, a moment suspended in time, a sound that lingered in the air longer than any echo. For a breathless second, the world held perfectly still. No one moved, no one whispered, no one even breathed too loudly. It was as if every person in the room was trying to make the moment last, just 1 second longer. Then a wave of sound crashed over him. People rose to their feet in a thunderous, overwhelming standing ovation that shook the floor. The applause was not polite or routine. It was raw, grateful, emotional. Some cheered his name, some clapped with hands trembling. Some simply cried, open and unashamed. Ernesto blinked against the growing whiteness in his vision, trying desperately to see something, anything. Of this moment he had dreamed of, he couldn't. All he saw was light. Blinding, shapeless light. I can't see anything. He whispered under his breath, barely audible, but the sound around him, the applause, the cheers, the standing ovation held him upright. And somewhere in the blur, 4 judges were sitting in stunned silence, their hearts torn open by a carpenter who walked onto the world's brightest stage, right as his own light was slipping away. The applause felt like a physical force, warm, thunderous, enveloping Ernesto in a sound he wished he could see. He stood frozen in place, clutching his guitar as if it were the only solid thing left in his fading world. He tried blinking once, twice, a third time, nothing. The stage lights, once overwhelming, were now Gone, everything was white, then gray, then a soft fog. Faces were erased, shapes dissolved. His heart lurched. This wasn't normal. This wasn't a slow fade. This felt like a curtain dropping inside his own eyes. Not yet. Please, not yet. He swallowed hard, trying not to panic. The last thing he wanted was for millions of people to watch him break down on stage. Somewhere in the haze, he heard Terry Crew's booming voice from backstage. "Give it up for Ernesto." The cheers grew louder, but Ernesto stood still, his eyes darting around helplessly, even though there was nothing left to see. Then Simon Cowell spoke. "Ernesto." Simon's voice was unusually gentle, almost cautious. "Can you hear me?" Ernesto turned his head toward the sound. He could barely distinguish where it came from, but he nodded. "Yes, yes, sir," he replied, his voice shaky. "What you just did," Simon continued, "is one of the most emotionally powerful performances I have ever witnessed on this stage." The audience roared in agreement. But Ernesto barely absorbed the praise. His vision was fading by the second. His breath quickened, chest tightening as he fought the rising tide of fear. His fingers dug into the neck of his guitar as if trying to anchor himself to the world. Sofia Vergara leaned in, her voice soft with concern. "Ernesto, are you okay?" He hesitated, then whispered the truth he didn't want to say. "Not here, not now, not when the world was finally seeing him. I can't see anything." A stunned silence spread over the theater. Sofia covered her mouth. Heidi's eyes widened. Howie sat forward instantly. Simon didn't move, but his expression changed subtly, sharply. A man who was rarely caught off guard suddenly looked shaken. "Nothing at all?" Heidi asked, her voice trembling. Ernesto shook his head slowly, trying to steady himself even as darkness pulsed at the edges. "It went. It just went. During the song. I knew it was coming someday, but I didn't think." His voice cracked. "I didn't think it would be today." The audience exhaled collectively, like a single broken sigh. A woman in the front row began crying openly. A man near the aisle covered his face with both hands. It was as if every person in the room instantly understood the weight of that moment. The cruel timing, the heartbreak of it. The tragedy of a man losing his sight in the very moment he stepped into the world's brightest lights. Sofia was the first to speak again. "Ernesto, that was the most beautiful performance, and now, knowing what you were going through." Her voice broke. She pressed her hand to her heart. "You are incredible." Ernesto's breath wavered. He lifted a hand to his face to wipe his eyes, but all he touched were tears he didn't realize were falling. He swallowed hard. "I just wanted to shine, once, before the lights went out." A ripple of emotion swept through the theater. People were no longer cheering. They were grieving with him. Simon leaned closer to his microphone. "Ernesto, I need you to listen to me carefully, okay?" Ernesto nodded, eyes unfocused but pointed toward the sound. "You didn't just shine." A small pause. "You lit up every single person in this room." The audience erupted again. Cheers, applause, people rising from their seats. But Simon wasn't finished. "And I want to tell you something else," he continued. His voice, usually authoritative, carried a softness that felt like a warm hand on a shoulder. "You're not losing something today." Ernesto frowned faintly. He didn't understand. Simon continued. "You're giving something. A breath. A gift. Your courage, your heart, your story. Another breath, and millions of people are going to remember what you gave them today." Ernesto's chin trembled. A single tear rolled down his cheek. "I didn't expect any of this," he whispered. "Sensations like this," Howie Mandel added gently, "don't come from perfect technique. They come from truth, from soul, and Ernesto, you put your soul on this stage." The theater felt small suddenly, like a family gathering instead of an arena. Heidi leaned forward next. "Ernesto, even if you can't see us, I want you to know something." Her voice wavered. "Right now, thousands of people are standing for you." The roar of applause confirmed it. He hugged his guitar to his chest, his last familiar anchor in a world growing unfamiliar by the minute. Then Sofia wiped her eyes and whispered, "You deserve something beautiful today." Simon exhaled. He glanced at his fellow judges. They all nodded silently in unanimous agreement. Then he looked back toward Ernesto's blurred figure and said, Ernesto, I think this is the easiest decision we will ever make. A beat of stillness. The audience sensed what was coming. Their cheers swelled like a rising wave. Simon stood. The lights intensified. At least that's what the audience saw. Ernesto saw nothing but soft gray. Then the moment exploded. Simon slammed his hand down. Boom. A golden shockwave detonated across the theater. Confetti cannons fired. The room erupted. People screamed, cried, jumped to their feet, and Ernesto, he heard it. He felt it. He sensed the entire room shifting into something magical, but he couldn't see it. He didn't know the world was raining gold around him. Didn't know that thousands of shimmering flakes filled the air like pieces of sunlight. Didn't know that the judges were smiling through tears. Didn't know the cameras were capturing the single most emotional golden buzzer moment in AGT history. So he whispered, trembling, "What's happening?" Terry Crews rushed out from backstage, strong, steady, a giant with a heart as soft as foam. He gently took Ernesto's free hand. "Ernesto," Terry said, voice thick with emotion, "you got the golden buzzer." Ernesto's breath caught, his knees buckled, but Terry held him upright. I did." His voice was a whisper lost in disbelief. "Yes," Terry said, guiding Ernesto's trembling hands through the falling confetti so he could feel it. "You did, and the whole world is cheering for you." Ernesto lifted his face toward the sky of gold he couldn't see, and even though his vision was gone, he smiled, wide, trembling, overwhelmed, because for the first time in his life, he didn't just build something beautiful for others, he became something beautiful for them. The world outside the AGT studio moved like a blurt. Axes honking, tourists smiling for photos, the neon lights of the city shifting from blue to gold. But Ernesto's heart was focused on something far quieter, something far more delicate. He stepped out of the backstage doors with his guitar case slung over his shoulder, not as a man who had just shocked millions, not as the contestant whose performance brought Simon Cowell to tears, but simply as a father, as a husband, as a man who had carried pain for so long it had begun to feel like air, always there, always taken in. He walked toward the waiting area where Sofia sat in a wheelchair, her small frame wrapped in a knitted pink sweater. Her face lit up as soon as she saw him, her dimples appearing like tiny sunrises on her cheeks. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice soft, faint, but full of love. Ernesto knelt down and took her hands into his. "My Estrella," he said, brushing the hair from her face, "I sang for you." Sofia's bottom lip trembled with emotion. "I heard it. Even from backstage, Mommy showed me on her phone. Everyone was crying." A soft laugh escaped him, the kind that comes from deep relief mixed with exhaustion. "Not everyone, just most of the country." Maria walked toward them with her eyes already glistening. She cupped Ernesto's face in her hands, pulling him close. "You did it." She breathed. "You told her story. You told our story, and you told it beautifully." But Ernesto shook his head with humbled conviction. "No, Carino, I didn't tell our story. She did. The world saw her light today, even if it's fading." His voice crackled when he said it. Maria pressed her forehead to his, steadying him, grounding him. Just then a producer rushed out through the doors, slightly out of breath. "Ernesto," he called, "sorry to interrupt, but well, there's something you should see." Ernesto exchanged puzzled looks with Maria, then followed the producer back inside the building. They walked through hallways humming with energy, technicians packing cables, interns scurrying with clipboards, contestants celebrating or crying into their hands. But the atmosphere shifted the moment they reached a large screen mounted on a backstage wall. "Take a look," the producer said, gesturing. The screen was filled with thousands, no, tens of thousands, of messages. "My mother passed from the same illness. Ernesto, your song healed something in me tonight. I haven't spoken to my dad in 3 years. I'm calling him now. Thank you." "Sofia, you're our fighter. You've got this. This man's voice, his story. I'm donating to help his daughter. Who's with me?" Below the messages was a link, one someone on the AGT Digital team had made without being asked. "Help Sofia Shine Again Medical Fundraiser." The donation counter refreshed in real time, numbers jumping every second. $3 $482 $6 $210 $12 $9 $199 $25 $6 $104 $53 $8 $190. Ernesto's breath stilled in his chest. Maria gasped, pressing her hands to her mouth. Is this real? The producer nodded, smiling softly. Your performance touched people, Ernesto. Really touched them. We've never seen something escalate this fast. Ernesto staggered closer to the screen, his eyes burning. All these messages, these strangers across oceans and continents, people who didn't know him, didn't know Sofia, yet felt moved enough to give, to care, to hope alongside him. It filled him with a gratitude so overwhelming he had to lean his hand against the wall just to stay upright. He whispered, "Gracias, gracias," over and over, the words barely escaping through the crack in his voice. After several long, awe-filled moments, Ernesto stepped back outside. Sofia was watching a butterfly that had somehow fluttered near the entrance, its wings glowing amber under the streetlights. When she looked up and saw his expression, astonished, tear-streaked, radiant, she tilted her head curiously. "What happened, Daddy?" Ernesto crouched down again, pulling her gently into his arms. "Mija, people all over the world are helping us, helping you. They want you to get better. They want you to keep shining." Sofia's eyes widened as she processed that. "People who don't even know me. People," he said softly, "who saw your light and wanted it to stay bright." She gazed down thoughtfully, then whispered, "Can I say something to them?" Ernesto nodded, retrieving his phone. He opened the camera and handed it to her carefully. She pressed her palms together, gathering her breath. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but full of genuine warmth. "Thank you for helping my daddy. Thank you for helping me. I hope one day I can hug all of you." Ernesto felt his heart twist. Maria wrapped her arm around him. The world was listening to their little girl, and the world was answering back with kindness. Hours later, when they returned to their small hotel room, the fundraiser had passed its goal by triple. Messages kept pouring in, nurses offering guidance, doctors volunteering consultations, viewers sending prayers and love from every corner of the globe. Ernesto sat by the window, guitar beside him, watching the city lights shimmer like 1,000 tiny hopes. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future not built from fear, but from possibility. He spoke softly, almost to himself, maybe this is our miracle." Maria kissed the top of his head. "Not maybe," she whispered, "it is." Sofia slept peacefully between them, her breath light and even. Ernesto laid a hand on her chest, feeling the steady rhythm, and closed his eyes. He didn't know what tomorrow held. He didn't know what battles still awaited, but tonight he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, real hope. The kind that grows when strangers become family. The kind that sparks when a song becomes a prayer. The kind that glows even in fading lights, because it is passed from heart to heart, never dimming, only multiplying. As Ernesto drifted into sleep, one final thought warmed him. The world is still full of goodness. And sometimes when one light begins to fade, millions more rise to keep it alive.